It is my honor to moderate this first roundtable discussion at the first Global Space Science Forum. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to our distinguished hosts and guests joining us in Rabat and from around the world. Typhoon and flood, wildfire and volcano, famine and migration. These are just some of the crises in which space science and technology play a crucial role, as has been discussed in some of the earlier sessions today. We can now predict, measure, prepare for, protect against, communicate through, and recover from crises through the use of space science and technology, and there is more opportunity to grow and refine the effort into the future. This growth will involve not only technological advancements in imaging the Earth, but also improvements in decision-making, reaction times, and coordination. Of course, all that takes partnerships, funding, and resources, so we will address those as time allows. I will introduce our distinguished panelists, and then we'll begin. As I introduce you, panelists, please make sure your name shows properly on your profile and turn on your camera. Dr. Shana McLean is Manager, Global Partnerships, Risk Reduction, and Resilience Advisor at NASA. She serves a dual role as Manager of the Earth Sciences Division, Global Partnerships with Mercy Corps, Conservation International, Microsoft, and Google, while also advising the Applied Sciences Program on Risk Reduction and Resilience. Dr. McLean endeavors to define NASA's role in resilience through the development of partnerships and projects in fragile and crisis-affected communities, and by exploring innovative methods and integrated approaches for bringing Earth observations and humanitarian actors together for building more risk-informed human and environmental systems. Shana, thank you for joining us today from the U.S. Mr. Ilya Montanari has been Head of Management and Controls in European Space Agency Business Applications since 2013. He is deeply involved in his charity Space Brains, where he aims to use space technologies to advance global education. Ilya is also a qualified investor with numerous holdings in private equity funds, and he practices AI applications on a daily basis. Ilya, thank you for being here. Ambassador Mohammed Ibrahim Al-Nukhali is a career diplomat with over 35 years of experience in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. He is a senior advisor of international relations at the Egyptian Space Agency, Professor of International Relations at the French University in Cairo, Director of the European Egyptian Council, and a member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. He was ambassador in Togo and Libya, consul general in Benghazi, chargé d'affaires in Sudan, and consul in Milan. He also worked in Germany and Kuwait. Ambassador Al-Nukhali holds the Medal of Honor Knight class of the German government. Ambassador, thank you for joining us for this panel. Mr. Robert Jacobson is a multifaceted entrepreneur, industry leader, and mentor with over 10 years of experience advising private investors in the potential of the space sector. His professional career has been characterized by an innate talent for early recognition of transformative industrial developments, such as emerging sectors, new business trends and cycles, and enabling technologies. He is the founder of Space Advisors, which helps organizations establish a strategy for space, and author of the book Space is Open for Business. Robert, we appreciate your being here today. Ms. Chiara Chiesa is a space PR and space technology transfer commercialization advisor in Italy, a mentor for Space for Women by United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, and lead of NASA Space Apps Challenge Brescia. She is an expert in public relations. She loves to face new challenges by anticipating solutions and by making possible the impossible. Thank you, Chiara, for being part of this discussion. Mr. Alexandre Vallée is Chief of the Space Services Department of the Radio Communications Bureau at the International Telecommunications Union, a UN specialized agency that fosters cooperation among 193 member states and more than 900 companies, universities, and international and regional organizations. It is in charge of registering all radio frequencies used by satellite systems around the world and beyond. Alexandra, thank you for joining us from Switzerland today. I'd like each panelist to make an opening statement, including how your organization is involved with these efforts, highlighting specific examples. Shana, would you like to begin by introducing us to your work at NASA?
Sure. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Lee. It's a pleasure to participate in today's event. So I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe NASA at large, and then I'll focus in on a couple of the activities that I'm involved in, as well as some of the activities I support. So coming from NASA and the Earth Observation, or the Earth Sciences Division in particular, we believe that Earth observations have a critical role to play in providing the scientific foundation for the decisions needed to prepare, respond, and recover from disasters and crises, and to really build the resilience of future events. We know our Earth is changing, that climate is changing, and that the scope of these changes is global and long-term, but with immediate impacts on our local communities. And of course, we see this in the number of examples you gave, Lee, in the rising sea levels, increased and intense hurricane and fire seasons, and increasing drought and famine across many of the countries in the world. The work that I lead in particular takes a three-pronged approach to understanding risk and building resilience. I manage the Global Partnerships Program, which is dedicated to building partnerships with non-traditional sectors. NASA has a long history of working, obviously, in the flight and space sectors, and also with academia. But we want to work with non-traditional actors, such as private companies and NGOs, to really pursue novel approaches to complex problems. The partnerships we have, in part, there's one with Mercy Corps, which I lead directly, which is a humanitarian aid organization, where we look at environmental security issues across the Sahel. We're also working with Conservation International, exploring opportunities to evaluate ecosystem and river basin health. A lot of that is based on understanding what different climate scenarios mean on the availability of natural resources across different communities in Africa, in the Mekong River Basin, and in parts of South America. And we're also partnering with private companies like Microsoft, where we're looking at urban resilience to heat and cold waves, and with Google, where we're building capabilities for improving air quality standards in local communities. Another activity that I'm involved in is managing the Valuables Consortium, which really then takes a closer look at understanding the impact of our science on the economy and on societal benefits, and understanding the role that Earth observations plays in really changing the game for some of the decisions that are made. And finally, I'll say that I work across our applied sciences program, where I support a lot of our applications towards improving risk assessments and the building of resilient communities. But specifically, I work very closely with the disasters program, which is managed by Dr. David Green. And a lot of his work is focused on improving the science behind risk assessments, impact assessments, and providing situational awareness to emergency managers during, before, and after a disaster as well. And I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Shana. Ambassador Al-Nukhali?
Thank you very much. In the Egyptian Satellite Agency, we are very concerned about creating, to first plan a...
I know the ambassador is there in person today, so...
Yeah. Yeah, you missed a lot. You didn't know what you missed, but it's okay. So I want to tell you that in the Egyptian Satellite Agency, Egyptian Space Agency, we are concerned beside building, assembling a lot of satellite for different purposes. But we are also concerned in first place to create a science-based society. It means we want to build, and we already had an educational platform for space technology to unlock the space technology and unleash youth potential. The young people, they are very keen, they are very, have a lot of enthusiasm to enter this world of space, you know, and we made a 35 agreement with local universities for experimental satellites. They make assembling satellite, and they make laboratories for assembling the satellites, and it is always a very good opportunity to identify talented people, to identify people who have creativity, they have a lot of skills, and they develop the skills, you know, and we are accompanying them, and they need a lot of accompaniment. But this is and also we started to make the STEM schools, what we call STEM schools. It is the schools of science, technology, and math. And these schools, they take only distinguished pupils, and they are given a fast track. And this will have a lot of positive impact in the future. So what we have a connection with the universities through a memorandum of understanding, through a lot of events we are hosting in the Egyptian Space Agency to show the young people, the students. We make training courses in summer, and we try to make the space knowledge available and easy, because and this is come by supporting and stimulating innovation. Young people, they have a lot of skills, a lot of talent. What they need some encouragement, they need some small funds, and also they need to feel that they have an added value to this process. And as I told you, this experience, this agreement with the 35 local universities to provide them with satellite, it is a pilot project, and I think we have a lot to share with similar agencies, and it would be a very good idea to put the young people together, because the young people, they used to speak a common language. They know a lot of things, and they can make a very good job together, you know, if they are together, because they can make a complementary, they can complete each other. From the other side, we are really concerned about climate changing, and this climate changing is related to a lot of issues. And as you know, for agriculture, for irrigation, for a lot of things, you know, you cannot avoid to use all the space technology. And this is a continuous process. We have a lot of contacts with African countries, with other countries, and we have actually what we call the initiative for the African Satellite Initiative for Development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Elia, would you like to introduce us to what ISA is working on?
Thank you, Lee, and thanks for having me here. My name is Elia Montanare, and in general, I like to joke and summarize my role as counting people and money at the European Space Agency. I do quite a lot of that, in fact, and I count also venture money. And I like to subscribe to everything that Ambassador Al-Nukhali has described, because today, a little bit, I'm counting on you to join me and Ambassador Al-Nukhali to advocate on the education aspects that the STEM, in particular also space, can bring, because it's a very transformative process. So I like also to say that education is like traveling with your mind. You see places, you change new things, an idea, and what is best to kind of travel with your mind in space, in space-related subjects. So in fact, most recently, and in terms of what I can offer in terms of information that I bring back from the IAC, the International Astronautical Conference that occurred in Dubai last week, is this experience, and in particular, a paper that we have presented in order to assess what is the impact of space applications. We presented particularly two cases, one called Sway for Edu, the other one was SATV in Africa. One was linked to education in sub-Saharan Africa and the availability of internet in schools that space can make available, in particular with the new telecommunication constellation that are becoming more and more ubiquitous. And the other one is more of a fintech solution at very, very competitive cost compared to other solution or other banking. And we often forget about these opportunities because we live in the so-called first world, and sending money is so simple, whereas sending money elsewhere, in particular underserved area, becomes extremely complex. And here we presented a paper together with another two colleagues where we really identify the impact, in particular on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we can talk a bit more about the paper. And yes, the last thing is you mentioned Space Brain. Space Brain is a charitable foundation that, in fact, was pivoting and started with space education. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ilya, would you like to put a link to your paper in the chat?
I will. Okay, I will.
Thank you. Chiara, why don't you share with us what you're working on?
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. I co-founded Interstellars, a not-for-profit cultural association in 2019 to support us in organizing NASA Space Apps Challenge in Brescia, to disseminate the importance of space tech transfer and space data, to address SDGs and bring awareness and opportunities to our young generation. In fact, many NASA Space Apps Challenge are specifically thought to create open source solutions that then anyone can implement to tackle SDGs. And I'm really proud because every year we have different partners, and we were so honored to have the Space Foundation with us this year. And also I organize it, and we organize it, partnering with IEEE Student Branch Brescia. And this organization is inside the University of Brescia, which of engineering, which is ranked the 10th best university of Italy. So yes, we do it practically, and we bring space data and space awareness to our young generation through NASA Space Apps Challenge.
Thank you so much, Chiara. Robert, would you like to enlighten us on your work?
Thank you so much, Lee. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I wish I could be there with you in Morocco, enjoying the great hospitality I've experienced in the past there. To provide a few illustrative examples from the Space Advisors side, whom I work with, I'll give you several illustrative examples. One is where we have a client who's an artificial intelligence business that's leveraging their tools that work with humans in the loop decision making for things like inspection and defect detection. The technology doesn't remove the human from the equation, but augments and enhances their effort, making the humans' work easier. And they're particularly interested in entering the space sector, so we're working with them around that way. Secondly, we have another client that is building a very robust way to reduce counterfeiting of various high-value products. And this client was interested in entering the aerospace supply chain. And lastly, we also we have a biology company where they're working with regenerative agriculture and also doing things around bio-based concrete production. That's probably the closest one related to sort of the climate change issue, which is definitely one I'm deeply concerned about. And we're also within Space Advisors, we're doing a deep dive on the applications of energy from space. So I look forward to the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And with all the panelists, please feel free to put a link in the chat to your website describing the program, as well as to your book, which is available on Amazon. Alexandra, would you share how your organization is involved, please?
Yes, thank you very much. And first, thanks for the invitation to this roundtable. This is really a privilege for me to be able to share with you what the International Telecommunication Union is doing in the field of space. So as you may know, we are the UN agency for telecommunications and ICTs. In fact, we were founded much before the UN system exists. We were founded in 1865 at the time for regulating telegraphy, and then our mandate and scope has expanded to the entire field of telecommunications and ICTs. But basically, the ITU is doing three things in the field of telecommunication. The first is standardizing telecommunication equipments. The second one is in the field of radio communications, where we manage an international regulations of the radio spectrum usage, including in outer space, not only on Earth, but also in outer space. And finally, we have a development branch that help us to provide to the membership of ITU tools, notably in the field of disaster prevention, disaster relief, notably through emergency telecommunications. If I may take an example, when there is an earthquake or a hurricane, one of the most difficult part of the recovery is that all telecommunication networks that are based on terrestrial technology are destroyed and lost. So what we do in cooperation with the member states is to send teams having satellite equipment like VSAT or satellite phone to restore immediately communications. And this is, for example, an example of what we do in terms of helping to mitigate the consequences of disasters.
Alexandra, I'm glad that you've talked about communications. When we think about the role of space science in crisis management, we normally think of satellite imagery, well before we begin to consider satellite telecommunications. Can you elaborate a little bit on this topic with some more examples?
Yeah, sure. You're right that satellite communications are, in fact, a very relevant usage of space technology in our daily lives. In fact, we are probably not seeing them, and that's one challenge that space technology has to address, is that people don't necessarily know that they are using space in their daily life, but they do. And for example, satellite communications are essential for making reliable the communication networks of today. This is especially true for the topic that we address about natural disasters and humanitarian crisis. Very often at these events, after these events, all other communication networks are down, and we only can rely only on space communication networks. And this is why it is so essential that all countries have at least access to this kind of hardware, but not only hardware, but also that the necessary, I would say, preparation in terms of human handling of this hardware is made in advance of the disaster, so that we can really take benefit of these technologies.
Like a fire drill. Great. Ilya, would you like briefly to respond on the role of telecommunication?
Yeah, in fact, Alexander, you really nailed the point. I think space telecommunication is a very special ingredient in the work that space actually provides, because as said, is practically invisible. It does basically, sort of a backbone or a data backhaul, and in particular in disaster is just the only opportunity, but in particular because it's very fungible and it, why don't we realize that space telecommunication is there? And I'm not even referring now to the mega constellation that we are working on. It's because it's very commercial, and these sort of things happen. And in the future, probably we'll see more and more hybrid mesh and the fusion of terrestrial and space telecommunication that will allow much better experience also for the customer. And here I'm talking about customer, kind of moving away a little bit from the classic institutional role, because effectively, in order to be sustainable, you cannot just switch it on when it's cold, this sort of thing, not when there is a disaster, because that's exactly when you realize that maybe the 3 trained people have left, the job, or the machine actually doesn't start as you kind of intended. And in fact, it needs to be there, in my opinion, all the time. It needs to be invisible, as Alexander has alluded, and in order to be fully sustainable, it also needs to be commercially sustainable.
Yes, similar to levees, they have to work when called on. Shana, would you like to talk about satellite telecommunications?
Sure. I think that for NASA, we look at this in a few different ways. I think one of the more obvious ways, maybe connecting to what Alexandra had said, is with the space telecommunications. We have a heliophysics division within NASA that looks at the issues related to coronal mass ejections or solar flares, that and other types of space-related problems that could challenge telecommunications from space. Space junk is another important component of that. And so I think that that's more of a resilience of space telecommunication type scenario that we look at. And then of course we've got the communication that happens between our data and then the processing and analyzing of it in a way that can actually work to support decisions. And so that's really what I focus on a lot, and so does the Earth Sciences division more broadly, on ensuring that we're working with partners and with different networks in order to not only get the data into the hands of people that need it, but ensure that it's being produced in a way that is sensitive to the partner's needs, and then of course using what I would call translational roles, where maybe you've got people that understand the decisions that need to be made, but maybe don't necessarily always understand the science behind it, and so you've got people that bridge these gaps and can work between fostering those types of exchanges and expanding science. And so there's a number of different ways we approach it. And those are a few.
Thank you so much, Shana. Ambassador Al-Nukhali, would you like to discuss satellite telecommunications in natural disasters?
For the communication, it becomes a real issue, because we cannot separate from our mobile. Everybody, from the smallest kid till the chief of intelligence, cannot be separated from his mobile, and it poses a lot of threat. How could we conserve? How could we secure all this information? And we have in some countries a problem of awareness, and this awareness is the most important thing in all fields, because people, they cannot understand why should we invest that much money for securing information. Normally, they say you put it in the safe and it is secured, but it is no more like this. So I think awareness is a key point to talk about awareness, and to look in a holistic way, because people, they are not aware, and they cannot really understand why underdeveloped country should spend too much money for space. If you cannot find general transport, why should you go to the space? So it is a problem two problems from my point of view. First problem is the awareness. Second problem is the communication. We have more and more difficulties in communication, even with people who speak the same language and have the same background, because communication, people, they must realize that we are all in the same boat, and we have to put hand in hand. And like this, all we will be saved. And this needs a lot of awareness, a lot of talking of people. But in a lot of places, you have petrified minds, you know. But it's a matter of time. Old people like me, when they go back home, a lot of problems will be solved. Thank you.
No, don't sell your generation short. Chiara, would you like to say a word about satellite telecommunications?
Yeah, I think that it's not a thought. I mean, it's reality. Telecommunications are becoming with 5G the pillars of digital economy. So with IoT, we will see a revolution in terms of economy, transportations, and also in the way companies use autonomous logistics and production, and of course, faster communication. For example, Apple is now developing its own satellite connections for its phones. So yes, it's a huge problem, and we just have to see and cooperate, like Ambassador was saying.
Thank you so much, Chiara. Robert, would you like to weigh in as well?
Sure thing. I'll tell a personal story. Back in August 2017, there were some hurricanes afflicting, well, as they seasonally do in the United States, and my parents were somewhat trapped. They had escaped from their house, and they had went to essentially an office structure, but there was flooding issues, and the telephones weren't working, and the only way we could communicate was with our cell phones. And my mom was terrified, and she hadn't been well, and we're using text and telephone or cellular phone, and I realized that even our cellular telephone networks are pretty fragile, and we need 24/7 backups, whether it's from satellites or other infrastructure, to provide that basic communication, just assurance, like, hey, it's going to be okay, because it was getting borderline close to what I would think would be a panicking situation. There was no fire department available. They were already strapped. So this isn't a Western country in the United States. So I try to extrapolate that and imagine what that's like in this climate crisis that we're living in, whether you're in a village or in a large city. It can be terrifying. So we are in a very interconnected world, and we have these tools, whether they're space. So we need to use them for business and for humanitarian purposes.
Thank you so much. Now that we've covered some of the scope of the work itself, let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the forces behind getting these resources working on the problems, getting things functioning throughout that chain that you just discussed, Robert. Would you like to start with talking about the importance of partnerships and collaborations to getting the resources that we need in a crisis?
Sure, thank you, Lee. I think we're in an era now where, as the saying goes, a rising tide lifts all boats. As I was just sharing just a few moments ago, we are interconnected, and I think our children don't quite understand, in space, there's things like we have like security restrictions, and there's still sometimes very, kind of nationalistic tendencies when it comes to national space agencies. However, I think this next generation that's coming up doesn't quite view the world this way. And I think we have to start taking that, at least being aware of how the next generation of space workers and our children, how they're going to participate, that it's not just going to be with their fellow citizens, that they're going to be working on international projects. And space is broad, and it's an interdisciplinary area, which is, I think, why and how more emerging nations can participate and benefit for all. There's going to be these ancillary benefits, which second order effects, more benefit if we have better educated population. That means better jobs, higher wages, and more taxes collected, and that increases the overall gross domestic product. So I think the partnership opportunities are immense, And if you're working within, say, an agency and you don't know where to start, just send an email, pick up the phone, ask for some help. You'll be surprised. I think even if it's just a modest ask, I think it's just starting the conversation about saying, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem. And even if that person within another group or agency can't help you, they can introduce you to someone who can. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what the other panelists have to say on this area. Thanks, Lee.
Great. Chiara, why don't you jump in and talk about partnerships?
Yeah, so we should think about the fact that we cannot address some issues like, for example, pollution without understanding that if we pollute waters and air in a country, even other countries will be affected. So it's important to balance responsibilities and actions in an equal, and I want to underline, in a more ethical way, but I will talk more about it in the next questions.
Thank you, Chiara. Ilya, can you talk about your history of partnerships?
Yes, and I'm going to say something that sounds nearly obvious, and obviously bringing in multiple stakeholders is an essential part of developing any sort of solution now. And this is because space is global by definition, okay? And this is really the thing that particularly like us with this mega constellation coming in, because it will allow global solution. And then, yes, as many says, yes, think global, act locally. So there has to be a sort of good customer mentality in order to resolve the local problems. I mean, it's clear that the problems we have in Western society are not the same as problems in developing countries. It's true. Nevertheless, little by little, and I want to repeat what Robert was saying. Yes, we need to bring and elevate all the people to the same standards. So, in order to eradicate poverty, you need to allow people to learn and to offer solutions like finance solution. Many people don't have capability of sending money, and we just simply forget about or accessing secondary education, because it either costs too much or it's just not possible to get secondary education in the place where they are born and raised. So I like to move away, and by the way, I'm an engineer, but I like to move away from the classic engineering mentality of building the beautiful machinery that nobody uses. Let's involve the academia in order to solve real problems, instead of self-reference beautiful things that sometimes become self-referenced. And I'd like to stop here. But first, just to again say, the institutional part, like the European Space Agency, and most probably NASA will speak for themselves, is there to prime excellent projects that actually get it started, get this sort of solution started, and eventually they will develop into more commercial solutions that are actually available to anybody.
Yeah, that's an exciting transition. And I look forward to talking about funding in the next question as well. You just mentioned it. Alexandra, would you like to weigh in on partnerships?
Yeah, I want to echo what Elia just said. Partnership have indeed to be built to really deploy on the field real projects, but partnership must always include the local communities, or at least the people you want to serve through a project. This is not sometimes so obvious when you discuss technology, when you are focused on technology. And very often, an exciting technology, a very bright new idea, technologically wise, may completely fail on the field if it is not deployed in partnership with the communities it is intended to serve. Because they really know what they need and what kind of application they need ultimately. So my main point would be indeed that partnerships are absolutely essential and must include the viewpoint of the community for which the project is designed to.
Wonderful insight. Thank you. Shayna, would you like to discuss the many partnerships you have at NASA?
Sure. I'll just start by saying NASA as an agency views partnerships as essential. I mean, everything we do is in partnership with someone to some extent. I mean, whether it's the building of, our satellites, many of which we've done with ESA, with other space agencies around the world, or we're building solutions in partnership. Last year at the in response to gaining a better understanding of the impacts from COVID, NASA, ESA, and JAXA developed a COVID platform, to help people understand, what COVID, was doing to all of us around the world and what the response looked like. And I would say that when it comes to disasters and different types of crises, none of us can answer any types of complexities alone, right? I mean, we need to be able to, we may have one component of the answer, but these are systemic, long-standing challenges that are then impacted by different climate scenarios. And so there's a constant understanding of, the science and how the questions related to the disasters and crises are changing. And then, what those disasters and crises might look like, as we move forward, how are we compounding food insecurity or poor natural resources management. And so I think that's why a lot of our work within Earth Sciences, beyond just developing satellites together with other space agencies, we're constantly working with other partners across the UN, but also across a number of different government entities, local, national, regional, et cetera. A lot of the work I do, of course, is very complementary to this as well. And I think maybe one example is just of work that I did, again, with the disasters program within NASA, where we were working in the Rohingya camps, Bangladesh. Nearly a million people fled nearly immediately to Bangladesh from Myanmar. And through a team that we developed in collaboration with Columbia University, we were able to work with IOM, UNHCR, UNDP to try to connect the Earth observations that we have on landslide susceptibility to helping prepare where the relief supplies would go so they wouldn't be damaged in flooding or landslides, to help the UN determine evacuation routes so that people could be removed quickly without loss of lives. And so, I mean, and this is just one example of how we approach, getting partnerships to work for the better of, society. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Wonderful story. Ambassador Al-Nukhali, would you like to talk about partnerships? You mentioned some university partnerships earlier with 35 different universities. Talk about that effort.
Yeah, partnership, it's very important, but as I said before, this needs, it needs a lot of awareness and maturity. People, in Arabic, we said we need to...
Ambassador Al-Nukhali, would you like to respond to this question? Are you able to...
You don't hear me?
Yeah. Yes, now I hear you.
No, I'm telling you, for the partnership, it's very important because there is a comparative advantage for all the stakeholders, and to make the best of everything, we have to see to make a partnership, to make better communication, to avoid duplication, and in this way this will advance. But this also, it needs a lot of maturity and a lot of awareness, as I said. But this will come with the time. With the time, a lot of things are changing very fast, and it will be easier. Because people, they will realize they cannot work alone, especially in the space field. Nobody can work alone, and we need each other, even for the slightest effort, the slightest added value. It is needed, and I think there is an improvement in a lot of things, because there used to be some friction or some rivalry, some things, but those things, are just withdrawing, And people, they realize they'll make better, they will make better job, better achievement if they work together. And there is a lot of opportunity, as I said, about the comparative advantages for every party. And this is especially for the space, you know, nobody can make it alone. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's briefly discuss how projects get funded, including the source of the political will for investment in technologies to support infrequent events. Dr. Al-Malik, Excellency Director General, referred to this in his talk earlier, sort of in balance with the economic benefits to those organizations, communities, and governments who participate in this kind of work. Ilya, would you like to discuss this?
Yes, of course, with pleasure. This is one of the prime role of agencies, like the European Space Agency, obviously the European Commission, and I wouldn't be wrong if I quote some of our colleagues saying that probably has never been such a great moment for funding project like it is today. In particular, let's say that in my little corner, actually I started from the other way around. Today, also thanks to the militarization, we're experiencing a sort of a Cambrian explosions of space applications. And this is not only the telecommunication, we are looking also at navigation, we are looking and obviously the Earth observation element. In particular, once you layer this element together, you get very, very good things. I believe that in North America, much of the, also most recent and interesting company, and maybe also talked about, like even Uber would not exist, or even Airbnb would not exist if it wasn't for example, satellite navigation, in particular precise satellite navigation. And this sort of template works very well for other type of applications. We are talking about now Earth-bound application, which I work day in, day out. We call them the business application at the European Space Agency. I will post the link on our website where basically things get promoted according to basically different type of thematics or specific type of technologies. These technologies goes across, sort of cross-fertilization fields that could be like artificial intelligence or IoT, like Chiara mentioned before, insurtech, fintech, edtech, and so, and also medical. We call it health tech nowadays. And all of these elements kind of merge together because space can actually act upon as an augmentation. We call it like space superpowers, in fact, because it allows practically from a product to really augment towards this additional thing. So in particular, and to be very, very specific now, we have at the European Space Agency a range of funding ticket that goes practically from 50K to several million, okay? And once you reach this sort of level of several million funding, then you become, and you would have actually produced either a product or a service that is actually capable to some sort of commercialization, and you become somehow the target of more investment, more kind of private investment. And that's what really we want to see. And we really pride in looking at this company growing, becoming bigger, generating jobs, of course, delivering revenues, tax-paying revenues to the country that is hosting these startups or SMEs. And so we really start from the 50K of the incubator. It's a big network that we have in Europe. It's probably very, very, it's probably one of the largest in the world. We have over basically 20 countries with incubators in several locations per incubator in the country. And there really startups can really kind of cut their teeth in order to start their work and get familiar with space, space application. And then comes in the other element, like the project side, let's say. And there we move from like 60K, I'm talking about 60,000 euro, in this particular case, because we are in Europe, up to several million, as I was mentioning before, both for feasibility or kind of demonstration projects, really to get to the sort of minimum viable product. This is true, for example, for, as we said, both for the telecommunication, navigation, but also Earth observation side. This helps a lot to kind of prime, as we were saying before, this activity that tends to be a little bit, underserved, right? Now, once we've done that, and I want also to kind of complement this discussion, because how then we go back to the countries and say these have served the purpose, because we are not real investors in a way as an agency, and we have to tell them, look, we have done very well with the money that we have employed. So we in fact look at what is actually socioeconomic impact analysis, looking exactly how much revenues, how much jobs, how much additional investment is basically our priming has generated on top. And what we like to do is also, like I mentioned right at the beginning of this conversation, is to look at the quantification of more, let's say, unmeasurable things like this, sustainable development goals. Often people think, I know this only go into the underdeveloped countries or countries under development. It's not true. Much of it actually applies to the Western world, because I know it for a fact that much of Italy is not served by broadband. As I'm calling from Oxford today, much of England also, much of the Great Britain is not served by broadband. So this is the sort of thing that we need to open our mind also in there. And for that, we really make measurements. We will want to show to our member states, so the member states that participate in the European Space Agency, what they get in return.
Thank you, Elia. And briefly, Shana, would you like to address funding?
Yes, I'll say maybe quite briefly. Funding and political will are always challenges, right? Because I think in truth, they're not always in alignment. We've got different people that are taking on different types of risk in the decisions that they make. And so, I think when we're dealing with maybe a short-term decision, that it's less impactful sometimes when people aren't willing to take large risks. But in issues like climate change, we almost have to work to get everyone in alignment at the same time to move towards something in a concerted effort, understanding there's uncertainty, and then trying to get the financial components in line that will really have the kind of impacts we're looking at, right, or that we need to be making. And so some of the challenges here are, even with NASA, right, these are administration dependent. Right now, we definitely have the signals, to work on resilience, climate change, environmental justice, but we have 4 years, possibly more, but at least 4 years right now to work on those things. And so how much, we need to just push forward as quickly as possible on some of the most complex challenges today. And that doesn't even touch on, I think, your point, Lee, which was, what do we do about different sizes of disasters, right? Some that get more attention, others that get less, but are still, equivalent in the number of lives lost or the economic impacts we're seeing. And so I think in part, the political will and the financing challenges are one component, but I think the other component, and we'll talk a little bit about this, I know, maybe with one of the last questions, is, the challenge that we always wait till a disaster happens, right? How do we get ahead of this and start acting earlier and with more intention? And so I think that in alignment with, political will and financing is something I'd like to see us tackle a little bit more often. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Al-Nukhali, very briefly, your thoughts on funding.
Very briefly, spending money is always painful for rich more than for poor people. And it is always a problem to convince people about if they spend money, they will get more benefit. And this is one thing, what I said in the beginning, that the awareness of people, they will make funding when they have a successful pilot project they would like to duplicate, to make another, and by a good communication to explain the targets and to justify the expenditure of the money. Thank you.
Thank you. Brief indeed. Robert, likewise, briefly on funding.
Sure thing. Well, romance without finance is a nuisance. And finance and funding, money is another word for currency. Currency also means energy. I don't think it's a lack of the energy, but I think it's some of its political will, creativity. What I'll say very briefly is that there's many new organizations that have hybrid structures, a both NGO component and a for-profit. And they're looking at investing in things that don't necessarily have near-term business plans or have a difficult business case to make for, say, for typical venture-oriented investments. And I think it's possible that to take advantage of those.
Thank you so much. We'll have to pronounce it nuisance. Alexandra.
Sorry. Yes, I think one of the elements to secure funding is also to show how one aspect of funding in space applications also nurture or help to build capacity in another field. For example, if you invest into the disaster preparation by training people how to use ground segment of space systems, then you start developing a workforce that will have space skills. And so it is both a very primary goal, a very concrete and immediate goal, having a team ready for when the disaster strikes, but also it is a start of a complete strategy for growing your workforce in your country for space. And I feel that if you are able to develop this kind of strategy, linking the various actions, then budget is coming, because you can ask for many different sides to contribute to this budget, and in fact to aggregate the budget into a complete space program. So that's why, in fact, a space strategy, a space policy is quite essential if you want really to move forward, in my view.
Thank you so much. Chiara, you have one of those nonprofits that were mentioned in this factor. Would you like to talk about funding very briefly?
Well, more than talking about my not-for-profit, I would say something on the fact that not always the VC fundings are the right thing to do. And I really prefer fundings from government, granted from the government. This is how you really help startups. Otherwise, startups will be born and will be bought when they are still a little thing. So it's I think granted from states. And yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, I'm going to combine the last two questions, give people a little flexibility in responding how they choose. There's what challenges and opportunities do you see for the next 5 years? And what are the key takeaways that you'd like to leave behind from this discussion for our audience today? Chiara, why don't you begin?
Okay, thank you so much. So I will not be very short, but I will try. So I can say we have to think about the roots of the problem. So why does poverty exist? Certainly, poverty can be linked to lack of resources, and their space technology can help. But it's not the only factor. We should understand that knowledge is key to prosperity. And we have then to ensure that knowledge lasts like, for example, ancient agricultural methods that can then be boosted by technology and space technology. But the important thing is not to delegate knowledge only to technology. With the fall of the Roman Empire in the Dark Crisis, the Arab process of economical and cultural development was boosted when Arabs collected with great fervor of studies the patrimony of many different cultures, with particular interest in the sciences, become the only intermediary between ancient culture and that of the modern age. So this great development was favored by three causes: the conquest of Persia, which allowed Arabs to come in contact with the world that the enlightened kingdom of the Sassanids had made culturally alive by providing hospitality to the philosopher of the pagan schools expelled by Justinian, the contact with India and its ancient knowledge, but above all, the conquest of Alexandria of Egypt, the capital of Hellenistic scientific knowledge, the highest expression of Greek science. These factors contributed to fueling a natural interest of the Arab people in the rational aspects of knowledge. The greatest Arab thinkers, Ibn Sina and Ibn Rashid, remembered Averroes, are philosophers of reason. That is, they try to reach the truth revealed by the Quran through reason and cultivate the science, medicine, logic, mathematics, and physics. So as history taught us, I want to suggest ICESCO to create a techno-ethic committee inspired by the one of United Nations, the COMEST, that was born in 1998. ICESCO Technology Ethical Committee could be built to integrate the future studies you have already set up. I think that it could be very important as an instrument to be linked to your deep tradition and knowledge, and you could choose to involve a like percentage of experts from allies as a tool of cooperation and exchange, showing, as you are already doing with those amazing events, openness, gathering the best from different cultures, and strong respect into preserving your cultural heritage for the benefit of all the parties involved. Thank you.
Chiara, a wonderful proposal honoring the proud history of Arab science. Thank you so much. Ilya, would you like to weigh in on the next 5 years and your key takeaways?
Yes, in particular, for space, we are at a modern age type of revolution. So space is really kind of a tipping point. Many people would have realized that already about a year ago when Crew Dragon launched the astronauts. Practically, US did not have an American launch for many years, and that was again made possible through opportunities. But with this, I don't want to praise the advent of the space billionaires. What I want to praise is really the fact that it is really true that like internet as an infrastructure has come to an age in the 90s. So space is coming to an age as an infrastructure, and this is thanks to a number of things. Kind of cosmic. Coincidence, most probably, and that's the usual thing. The miniaturizations of IT, the materials, the big data, the capability to process all this data. Probably space is the biggest data generator out there, and without even artificial intelligence, and more is to come, practically, with the advent of IoT and stuff like that. So my call for action is actually, and this is really in line with what ICESCO is stand for education and get the next generation ready for these technologies by launching dedicated things, because space is all of this and needs all of that. Okay, and that's really where I stop. Is I don't believe that space is a separate thing. You just need to cross the Kármán line above 100 kilometers from the surface of the Earth in order to be space. No, there is much, much more, and I wish to get in contact with any of you in order to initiate these sort of educational programs.
Thank you so much, Ilya. Ambassador Al-Nukhali, your view on the next 5 years and any call to action?
In 5 years, for the opportunities, the limit is the sky for the opportunities. But for the challenges, what we considering now as a problem or a challenge, it will be auto-solved by the time. But I think that the most important from my point of view is that we need a new appropriate regulatory framework. There is the space now is crowded. There is old players, newcomers, promising players, and it is important to make a fair regulation for everybody, so everybody can have his share. But this must be preceded by a set of minds that the people, they must understand that we are in the same boat and we have to work together hand in hand. And this is the most essential thing, the most messages should be passed, that nobody can work alone, especially in space. So what is needed actually is to avoid that the newcomer in the space field will not have equal opportunities or will have a unfair treatment by others, So we have to, this regulatory framework must be worked in a just, transparent, and collective way. So all the stakeholders should have equal rights and equal opportunities and equal treatment. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Mark Sarangelo mentioned that countries and organizations looking to enter should leverage their strengths to find that fair treatment that you mentioned. Thank you so much. Alexandra.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would say that in the next 5 years, the many additional data will be produced by space systems. Well, many new space technologies will be deployed. In fact, this will happen. What I think is the biggest challenge is to make sure that there is enough people able to use this data or able to use these technologies for developing applications that serve daily lives. And this is why I believe one of the most essential action is to invest in human training, human capacity building, to develop the know-how and the usage of space technologies and space data. And this is also one of the challenges because it requires consistency in the budget allocation. You need to allocate budget not only once, but every year, making sure that you have this promotion of human development, human capacity building, and human training. So that's the message I would like to emphasize, that training and capacity building is, in my view, really both the challenge and also the opportunity for the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert.
Thank you. So space has never been easier to access for our species, and I hope it continues to continue that trend. In space is humanity's ultimate business plan, but not just about the money. Could lift out billions of our most vulnerable out of poverty, and I think that's hopefully a shared collective goal. For the next 5 years, I think we'll be seeing operationalizing of the infrastructure that's currently being sort of placed in space and in development, and we can look forward to new applications that'll be derived from that infrastructure. And the idea that space is a frontier, I think is going to start to be kind of realized and manifested, that we're going to be going out and participating more in that frontier of space. In terms of my own call of action, I think I'd like to see more global cooperation, more multinational cooperation, and would caution the potential tragedy of the commons that could result from the misuse of the precious space resource. So I'll leave the idea that only space could do quadrillion. Humanity's never done anything in quadrillion. And space is not just open for business, but it's open for all of humanity.
Thank you so much, Robert. Shana, would you like to close us out with your views on the next 5 years and your call to action?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Maybe I'll just start by building briefly off of a previous comment that Alexandra made in relation to building the next generation workforce that's capable of navigating not just today's science, but also the next generation of Earth observations or other types of science available. Bridging that science with humanitarian fields. Like what I think that there are a lot of challenges in is really sustaining and institutionalizing these practices. And that involves capacity building on one hand, which has been mentioned a number of times today, but also adaptation and then sustainability. And then the sustainability component comes into what I would say would be my call to action, which is that all of the elements that we discussed in our panel today are components of what we need to see to really make the changes needed, right? It's in part Earth observations and other types of science, specifically to Robert's point on open and available science and equity considerations, but also partnerships, funding, communication, political will. All of these things have to be not just approached from a pilot perspective, but from a sustained, adaptable, and institutionalized process. And so I think this is true just in general when it comes to building the next generation of people working in the fields that we're talking about today, but that's also true if we're talking about issues related to climate change and anticipatory approaches to disaster and crisis response. And so I would just leave that as my call to action, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for participating in this discussion. I think for me, a key takeaway was the recurring theme that we don't just learn something once. We learn it over and over again, each time with different perspectives, and we need to continue to apply those lessons and collaborate as human beings.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee Steinke, for a wonderful roundtable discussion. I will just wrap up the things that what we did today. We had a very good day, I hope, and our audience and the participants online learned a lot from the Space Ecosystem Significance session. Then we had a Space Science, Earth, Environment, Human session by our speakers from different space agencies, including the chairman of Bangladesh Space Agency, the Majid Al-Anaisi from the Saudi Space Commission, and the intervention of the ambassador Al-Nukhali was wonderful. Thank you very much for all of you for coming here. And Ms. Chiara, this suggestion for having the ICESCO Technological Committee to use it as a tool of cooperation, thank you very much for such a kind and nice suggestion. We will definitely take it to our higher administration and we'll talk about it in details. Ladies and gentlemen, I would say thank you so much again and again for active participation and being with us whole day in this hall and also online. I would just share with you the agenda of tomorrow. We have really exciting speakers tomorrow from the different fields, and also the sessions, relationship of, for example, the relationship of telecommunication, cybersecurity, and space science would be also the theme. And we will also talk about the member states, the space agencies' role in creating awareness and technological in member states. We will be having here the engineer Majid Al-Anaisi. We have the Professor Anas Emran with us, with his team. And we'll be having Rania Toukebri from Tunisia. And if you see the agenda, you will find really the beautiful bunch of the speakers lined up for tomorrow. And we request and we appreciate your presence tomorrow again. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening ahead. Thank you so much.